Have you ever stopped to think about how an institution as massive and long-lasting as the papacy could be built on the Bible? Well, it turns out it pretty much all comes down to a single, really powerful verse. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to investigate that one line of scripture. We'll look at the arguments for it, the arguments against it, and how the way it was read literally shaped world history. All right, let's get into it. I mean, think about it. The entire claim to papal authority, which is a total cornerstone of the Catholic Church, it all hangs on a promise Jesus made to just one of his apostles. So what on earth is this foundational verse? And that brings us to the key piece of evidence in this whole story. You'll find it in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16. And it's a moment that you could say changes everything for an apostle named Simon. And there it is, right here. In this one moment, Jesus gives Simon a new name, Peter. And then he says, "On this rock I will build my church." This single sentence, right here, becomes the launch pad for the entire idea of the papacy. Now, from a Catholic perspective, this verse isn't just some nice poetic line. No, it has three absolutely massive implications. First off, Jesus says, "I will build my church," which means he's setting up a real, formal institution. Second, he says he's going to build it on Peter, the rock, which establishes him as the leader. And third, that promise that the gates of Hades won't prevail, well, that implies this church is meant to be indestructible, to last forever. Okay, so to really understand this claim, we have to kind of become linguistic detectives for a minute. We need to decode the most important word in this entire verse, rock. What did Jesus actually mean by that? To get the full impact of what's happening here, you got to look at the original Aramaic that Jesus would have been speaking. He renamed Simon to Kepha, and Kepha literally just means rock. So the wordplay is incredibly direct and powerful. You are rock, and on this rock I will build my church. See? It's not just a nice metaphor, it's a direct renaming that singles Peter out in a very, very specific way. And if that wasn't enough, this idea of Peter's unique authority gets reinforced in the very next verse. Jesus gives him the keys of the kingdom. Now, back in ancient cultures, this was a huge deal. Giving someone the keys was a clear symbol that you were granting them authority over your whole house or your kingdom, and it was an authority that could be passed down, which really implies a line of succession. But, and this is a big but, this interpretation is far from universally accepted. So now, let's switch gears. Let's step into the role of the cross-examiners and explore the major counterarguments. So, is the case for Peter being the rock completely airtight? Well, not according to a lot of people. The debate over what the rock really means has been at the very heart of some major theological disputes for centuries. Okay, so the first major counterargument you'll hear is this. The rock isn't Peter the person, but the powerful confession of faith he had just made a moment earlier. You are the Christ. From this point of view, the church is built on that foundational belief, not on one guy. But the rebuttal from those who support the Catholic view is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. They'd say that biblical symbols often have multiple layers of meaning, so the rock can be both Peter the man and his incredible faith. Another key argument people bring up points to other parts of the Bible where the Apostle Paul says that Jesus is the only foundation of the church. And that seems to directly contradict this whole idea of Peter as the foundation, right? Well, the counterargument to this is all about the idea of delegation. Sure, Christ is the ultimate divine foundation, but the Bible also talks about the apostles being a foundation. So the argument goes that Christ can delegate a foundational role to Peter without taking away from his own ultimate authority. So we have the biblical arguments laid out. It's a bit of a tug of war. So where do we go from here? We turn to the receipts. We turn to history. How did the earliest Christians, the ones who lived just a few generations after the apostles, how did they understand this verse? Let's call our historical witnesses to the stand. And when you start digging through the writings of the early church fathers, you see this really consistent theme start to pop up across several centuries. Starting in the late 2nd century, you see major Christian leaders writing about Peter's special role and the unique authority of the church in Rome. I mean, just look at Saint Irenaeus. He's writing in the late 100s. That's just a couple of generations after the apostles died. And he's already pointing to the church in Rome, the one founded by Peter and Paul, as the standard for what to believe, because of its preeminent authority. That is a remarkably early statement about Rome's special status in the Christian world. And then, about 50 years later, you've got Cyprian of Carthage, and he takes it even further. He directly connects being in the church with being in communion with the chair of Peter. For him, it's simple. If you desert Peter's authority, you're pretty much deserting the church itself. And then, in the late 4th century, Jerome, the guy who translated the whole Bible into Latin, gives us the practical reason for this whole structure. He says, look, one apostle was chosen to be the head, to act as a source of unity, to stop the church from splintering into a million different groups. The main job of Peter's office was to keep everyone together. Okay, so we've seen the verse, we've heard the arguments, we've looked at the history, but what's the big picture here? Why does the interpretation of this one single line of scripture from 2,000 years ago still matter so much today? Well, it all boils down to this. This interpretation doesn't just establish some leader from the past, it establishes a living authority for today. And that authority is seen as absolutely essential for 3 key things: for interpreting scripture, for preserving unity and stopping doctrinal chaos, and for providing a direct, unbroken link all the way back to the original church founded by Jesus. And all of that leaves us with one final massive question. The interpretation of this one verse gave rise to an institution that literally shaped Western civilization. It just makes you wonder, how might the last 2,000 years of history have played out if this one verse was understood in a completely different way?